Like with everything in life, things generally tend to change from the idea phase all the way to the execution, and Resident Evil Village is no different. A lot can change during each stage of a game's development, with the developers changing certain aspects of the original plan as they go to better fit the game's final result. So in this video we're going to be covering the cut content from the 8th installment of the Resident Evil mainline series, and as expected there will be a few spoilers in this video, so keep that in mind. But with that said, let's jump into the cut content from Resident Evil Village. Kicking it off, we have the Demasque dozen. In the Resident Evil Village that we played, the Claude matriarch turned dragon has 3 daughters, and even this dragon concept was originally intended for another boss altogether. And in terms of her 3 daughters, this was nearly not the case at all. There was a point in time where it wasn't a trio of sisters, and instead it was dozens upon dozens of sisters inhabiting the castle, all ready to feast on Ethan Winters' blood. However, after trial and error and testing the game's tempo, the Demasque family was ultimately decided to be Alcina and her 3 daughters. On top of this, Demasque was originally envisioned as a bewitching vampire with giant garden clippers, with the art that's shown depicting a character that is the spitting double to that of her now daughters. Ultimately, the final game saw a head honcho at the top of the food chain with 3 kids made up of flies that served as mini bosses throughout the castle, forcing you to use the environment to your advantage to solidify them. Backpacks, cameras, and item boxes. Something you may have noticed missing in Resident Evil Village is the item box, a key part of many of the mainline entries. It allowed you to store weapons, key items, and other assortments of goodies like healing herbs so that you didn't flood your inventory with junk. It saved you discarding, or if it were in Village, selling your excess baggage. However, Capcom opted to take from the 4th game, as 8 often did, with no item box anywhere to be seen. However, that's not the only thing that nearly changed in the save rooms. Typewriters returned in glorious fashion with a distinguished 1960s appearance, as to differentiate them from Resident Evil 2 and 3. They were a return to form from the save points in Resident Evil 7, which were tape recorders, but they were nearly completely different altogether, and that being cameras. The player would take a photo of a faceless man to save, and this would have been a nice change of pace, but as we all know, the good old typewriter made the cut instead. Finally, Resident Evil 4's suitcases returned as the means of storing goods, with Ethan lugging around a sniper, shotgun, grenade launcher, magnum, pistol, and other random bits and bobs using it. It's surely heavy, but he managed. Yet, Winters nearly had a trusty backpack overflowing at the seams with his inventory's contents. It's likely that the suitcase was chosen for a similar reason as to why the item box was omitted, and that was to emulate the Resident Evil 4 feel. Mia Winters and Ada Wong. Originally, Mia Winters was going to be recovering from the incidents during Resident Evil 7 in that opening, which would have seen her in a wheelchair, solemnly sat by the window as in this concept art. Ultimately, that was cut. It still could have worked even with Mother Miranda masquerading as Ethan Winters' wife, due to her at some point swapping the real artifact out for herself, like a twisted version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Nevertheless, the narrative ended up being that Mia was trying to move on as much as possible from the twisted shenanigans of the Baker residence that saw countless deaths and untold trauma. She was trying to forget it, or at least Miranda wanted Ethan to think that. And as for Ada Wong, as if Village wasn't close enough to Resident Evil 4 as it is, she originally was intended to be introduced as a mysterious masked person that saves Ethan from the trial with the family, the same one that in the final cut saw Heisenberg egg Ethan down a hatch into an elaborate series of spike-clad traps. At the time, she was investigating the village for whatever reason, probably trying to steal another virus as she does, donning a Bloodborne-like getup that made her appear as if she was a doctor from the era of the Black Plague. Given that we already had Ethan, Chris Redfield with Blue Umbrella, and the BSAA with their bioweapons all vying for the mold and Miranda, a fourth party in the mix likely would have been too much, and it seems that this was the reason why Capcom didn't want to have too many storylines overarching each other, and especially with the characters involved, they didn't want too many big name characters having different plot points and goals throughout the game. It was expected that she would maybe show up in a DLC for RE8, but it seems like they've missed the beat on this, and if she does appear, it's most likely going to be in RE9, or maybe even the DLC for that game, but of course time will tell. Mother Miranda and her kids. Miranda is at the epicenter of the village's troubles. The lichens, the mold, the dysfunctional family, all desperate for approval, acting out like moody teenagers, Heisenberg being the chief among them. However, the original plan saw her as a scientist, a researcher investing the town and its lowly woes. This ultimately changed, and one of the very first villains, Spencer, the founder of Umbrella, ended up being retconned as her student. To boot, the factory portion of the game originally sported far more characters, with Heisenberg being a twin while his mother was a subject for brain experiments. His father would have been the leader of the village, a stoic man with a cane and long, scraggly, almost Einstein-like haircut with a black gas mask and a loose scarf. In the original idea for the Heisenberg part of Village, he would have played the role of the final boss of the factory area as opposed to his son, who took that role in the end, going as far as to call Chris Redfield a boulder puncher, which was absolutely ridiculous, as I'm not sure how he knew Chris was over in a volcano punching a boulder, but nevertheless it was a comment he threw in. Whether he wanted it or not, it seems his accomplishments have earned him some renown. And then we have the Duke, who was going to be the fifth lord, while the Benevientos were initially envisioned as a ghost family with ghastly pale children, encompassing a sickly thin father and mother with no face. What replaced them was the lone Donna Beneviento and her eerie dolls and Silent Hill clad horror. Either likely would have had me bricking it at midnight with the curtains rolled down and the lights turned off, but dolls and giant crying baby fetuses are no better and infinitely more horrifying than anything akin to Paranormal Activity, so Capcom seems to have made the right call here. There were a lot of other little changes, such as where the Lady Demasque fight originally took place, but these were some of the largest and most noteworthy alterations to Village throughout its development between the concept phase and the final execution. Had these ideas stayed, we may have faced an army of blood-sucking fly monsters, a paranormal family of undead apparitions, a twisted brotherhood of mechanical monsters manipulating their own mother, and Miranda at the center of it all. Just a researcher caught up in the thick of it, not unlike Ada Wong, as she often tends to find herself. It's very interesting to look at all this to see what Nerly was, because it's so similar yet so distantly different, but that's how the process of game development goes, and these ideas usually don't die off, at least not all of them, and rather they evolve and adapt to form what we end up seeing when the game rolls out to the stores. It's easy to see these ideas and imagine them to be cooler or more fun, but perhaps it would have been messier and much more inconsistent and overstuffed for the story they were going for, especially with these so many Heisenbergs. I feel like one Nicolas Cage wannabe is enough, so it's probably a good job Capcom kept the story as it released. And with that said, guys, that does bring us to the end of this video. Be sure to drop your comments down below as to what you thought of these ideas and concepts that never made it to the final release of Resident Evil 8, and whether or not you think they should have been included, or if you're glad they weren't. And I look forward to reading how the discussion and opinions continue down below. As always, a like would be extremely appreciated. If you did enjoy the video and or learned anything new, it is extremely appreciated. It helps out the channel a ton. And don't forget to subscribe for a lot more Resident Evil content. Don't forget to join our Discord, link is at the top of the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.